My name's Craig McCall, and I'm one of the consultants and trainers here at TEPCO. And I'm going to put together a series of videos. This is going to be the introduction or a basic video of the turnaround cost control process. We see cost managed a lot of different ways in the field today, and with that being said, a lot of focus is put on the planning and the estimating and the scheduling and coordination process, but the cost always seems to be something that's not out front when it by far is the most important factor of any turnaround or shutdown. So this will be the basic overview, and we'll discuss this, and then we'll follow with a series of videos after. For the first video, I've broke the turnaround cost process down into a few different groups and categories that I want to go through. It's not cost in detail, but this is just an introduction of how we're going to break this down. So the first thing I'm going to talk about during the video is cost essentials, what it takes to put together good cost. The second thing is turnaround management. And I'm going to talk on this part about a number of different management, coming from a maintenance perspective, coming from a capital project perspective, and then also where the turnaround management perspective would fit in from a cost control process. The turnaround cost cycle. We'll go through the very beginning from scope development all the way to closeout. And then cost structure at a bare minimum, how we should handle and set up cost and control cost through the turnaround. And then the last one I'm going to talk about is cost accounting versus cost engineering. The first section I'm going to cover is cost essentials. With cost essentials, I'm going to talk through a process that is the foundation and the base for cost and schedule. First and foremost, the biggest thing is identifying scope. In this particular example, I'm going to use a body of water. And what we want to do is get from side A to side B. If scope is not clearly identified and detailed exactly what we want to do, it can cause for inadequate job plans, not enough job plans, and that does affect the cost and the schedule. That's why we request that scope's fully detailed. There will be come a time where scope is frozen, and once we get the scope and we put it all together, we do have the ability to give a plus or minus 50% estimate, cost estimate, based on the detailed scope. In this particular scenario, I can't do that because I don't know whether they're going to swim across, to jump across, to build a bridge across, to fly across. So with that detail, we can continue to build. So we're, in this example, going to say we're going to build a bridge across this. So with that comes out the jobs. What are we going to do? How many jobs are associated with the scope of work that we identified? So we know for a fact we're going to have a job to stabilize the soil. We're also going to have a job to identify the water, the depth, the current flows. What do we have to do to the foundation underwater to build this bridge? And the third would be to actually build the bridge. So from this scope of work, we identified 3 different jobs. At this time, we have it a little bit more fleshed out, and we can give you a plus or minus 30% estimate. So we have the jobs that are associated with the scope. A lot of turnaround managers, planning managers, operations, maintenance, safety, and people are involved at this point, because we can now add more jobs that may require more things, or take jobs away that might not apply to that particular piece of scope. But we do like the involvement of all of these people above, because it has an impact on, like I said, the environmental safety, some of the maintenance things, and day-to-day operations of the work that's going to be performed. The next step is where the actual planners come involved. So we get a planner that's a professional, whether it be mechanical planners or piping and valve planners or electrical planners, and they go step their jobs out. These jobs are generally called tasks or activities or operations if you're using SAP. And I'm going to focus on the one to actually build the bridge. So in this example here, we had a planner actually come in and step the job out. So he's going to do the foundations, pour, he's going to do the steel, all the inspections, QC, and sign off of the bridge. The major piece in this one right here is understanding everything that goes into the details of these particular tasks. So at this point in time, it would give us a clear understanding of the material cost, how much labor would be involved to do this, because planners are telling you about the number of people and the amount of time that they think it's going to take. the tools and rental equipment that we're going to take to actually stand this bridge up, and any of the miscellaneous support that we may need. That may be on-site or off-site support to actually put this bridge together. The major piece, and we see it is it a piece that's missed in a lot of different places, is the validation of this job plan. So if this plan is not validated from a client's perspective, the owner, then it can go right through into the cost, into the schedule, and then way later down the line it requires change orders to remove or add things because the validation process wasn't taking place. So the validation process is a major piece to cost and schedule development. But once this is done and it's been validated, everything's signed off, I can give you a plus or minus 10% on what it's going to take to put the bridge up. If we also added the soil, the water, I could give you a plus or minus 10% on the entire scope of work that has to be done. So this is the foundation and the basis for a lot of different things. The detail that a planner puts into that job is the core piece. We see a lot of jobs that are vague, very high level one-liners, and it makes for inaccurate cost and inaccurate schedules. We do also prepare for change, and in this particular scenario I put supports under there and labeled it contingency. So once all the jobs are established and put together, we do put contingency in a schedule. I wanted to throw this slide in here, and it's not like solely focused on the cost process, but I want to show you one of the big things that we see in the industry today based on a turnaround manager's perspective. But I'm also going to use a little bit of the other group's perspectives coming from a capital projects, a maintenance, and also include the turnaround. But these are three different people, three different managers with three totally different processes. One, they prepare different. Their preparation plans and the way they get ready are totally different. They have different execution strategies. One's measured on their project. One may be measured on KPIs and backlogs, and the other one's managed on the time that unit's down and how successful they are, and whether we can bring the unit back up on time within good cost, and they directly affect one another. They have different reporting types and reporting cycles, and their goals, the way they measure each other is totally different, whether they're going to be successful or fail. But to use an example, if we had a capital project, which happens a lot, that goes on during a turnaround, a capital project can kill the turnaround due to the fact that they may be lifting something, or a lot of people may be in a particular area and we're over allocated and can't get work done, or not enough people, and this has a direct impact on the cost and the schedule. So integration between these three people is crucial. What we see in the industry today is a lot of maintenance managers, very successful maintenance managers or planners, are put into the role of a turnaround manager whenever the turnaround pops up. So there's not a truly dedicated turnaround manager. There's a maintenance manager thrown into the position whenever the turnaround comes. That person goes into that position without the proper training or an understanding of how to control the cost. They may be great in the field, but from a cost perspective, it makes it very difficult from a cost control perspective if I try to manage a turnaround by work order or by job. And that's the way maintenance generally does it, is with work orders or tickets on a daily basis. So this isn't to the fault of the maintenance manager, but putting the right person in the right role, or at least getting that person the right training to understand the full environment that they're fixing to get into. So I'm going to pull all three back into the picture, and I'm going to look at the life cycle, or the actual span of a turnaround. So we do a lot of prepping and planning. That prepping and planning, the more time spent up front prepping and planning with these three people integrated together, and how they're going to control the actual turnaround window is crucial. So there's integrated efforts on what's going to take place during the turnaround, and who's going to control that work or own the work during that turnaround window. So I'm going to focus on that turnaround window. So during that turnaround window, that turnaround manager owns all the work. Now, This includes the maintenance work and this includes the capital project work. So an example would be if I were in a capital project group and we were going to do some tie-ins or had to put some equipment in, the drawings that were associated with that equipment going in would go to the turnaround team. If the capital project group did not have a planner that knew the exact planning process from a turnaround perspective, that's another major issue. Even though the costs are totally separate, I still have to integrate and control the day-to-day work in order for it to roll smoothly from a cost perspective and from a scheduling perspective. So if work is going on from two different perspectives, it makes for clutter, and where clutter is, there's confusion, and where there's confusion dollars are being lost. But know that the turnaround manager owes information back to the maintenance manager and the capital project manager on a daily basis. So how is my project doing? Is my maintenance work getting done? When is it going to get done? So they can see that from a daily, every shift, or a weekly perspective, depending on how long the unit's down. Next is the turnaround cost cycle. I'm going to work from 12 o'clock, or from scope development, clockwise all the way around, and I'm putting scope development at the very, very top and first and foremost because, as we discussed earlier, scope is the core or the foundation for clear and accurate cost and quality schedule. So if we work around clockwise, the next thing we're going to look at is what I call a code of account, or a collection process of the budget. So if we're building a budget, costs should not just be gathered up by work orders. Costs should be gathered and put into buckets, and these buckets ought to be standard collection buckets for every turnaround. If that's identified, it should be clear and understanding to everybody that we have a standard cost process. A lot of places are very, very unclear, or they go from work order to work order, and it's not manageable. But with a code of account or a collection process, it makes it very, very understanding and very clear. So this is how we report the cost out. So once we identify the scope goes into particular buckets. The buckets are then produced a 50% estimate. Know that soon as scope's identified, as we talked in the previous slide, that jobs are being identified, planning is fully underway, and we're getting ready and preparing for the turnaround. So the planners are fully planning. Once jobs are identified, I can then go and give you a plus or minus 30% estimate once all jobs are identified. A lot of companies will freeze scope, turn in a 50%. Freeze the work list or the list of jobs, turn in a 30%, and then take place and start their planning process. But planning is eventually going to come down. It's going to be complete. Once planning's complete, we move data to the schedule. And now, data does not have to be moved once all planning is complete. Generally, data is being moved on a daily process through the planning, but at some point in time, the schedule will tie all the logic, put the work together, and he's going to be able to produce what we call a staffing plan. So once he produces these staffing plans, this is the foundation for a cost control person, because the staffing plans are then distributed to all companies that we think are going to perform the work. Now, this is resident contractors. This is we're producing them for the client or the owner, and any outside vendor or contractor that we think is going to be performing the work. The companies that will then come back with a bid, and they will say, I bid this much based on the people that you say that it's going to take me. They may walk the jobs and look at the jobs with work packages, but there's a session here that goes on that's called a challenge session. So the bids are submitted, the packages are reviewed, and there's an agreement made on how many people they're going to bring on site to perform the work, or how much it's going to take. Now, these bids are broken down into specific code of accounts, and I'm going to discuss that a little bit more, but just know that the bids are pretty standard when they bid that job. Once the challenge session is complete, we can then turn in what we call a plus or minus 10%. This is our controlled budget. We're gonna lock this budget, turn that number into management, and that's what we're going to be held accountable for. This will have contingency in that budget as well. Prior to execution, we'll have meetings. The meetings will say how we will do our daily tracking of people, of equipment, of the logistics, how we will update the schedule, what it will look like from a cost perspective. Then meetings back to management on what we will produce from a cost and a scheduling perspective. And our whole goal during execution is to do two things, and that's to give the daily cost to date, and then also forecast where we think that cost is going to end up at. So we prepare people for what they're going to be doing on a daily or a shiftly basis. Once the turnaround starts, there should be no changes. I mean, there's going to be changes to the work that's being performed, but from a reporting, a cost control perspective, and a scheduling perspective, it's locked, and it's been locked during the last part of this whole cycle, saying thou shalt do it this way. But once the turnaround's complete, invoices will start coming in, and they may even start coming in during execution depending on the longevity of your turnaround. It is very, very easy to reconcile an invoice back to a daily log or a daily process that we were tracking if our code of account is standard. So we'll have them invoiced by code of account as well, and we'll cover this in just a little bit. But once the invoices are reconciled, they're either approved or not approved by the owner, and then we can start the closeout process. On the next section, I'm going to talk about a cost structure at a minimum, but I want to do a little bit of a recap here on some things that I've hit on, but I want to throw them out there. The first one is manage turnaround costs like a capital project, not like daily maintenance. So it makes it a lot easier to gather cost, to control cost, to forecast cost, and report accurate cost if it's set up like a capital project, not by work order. Cost should be controlled by company. You should try your best to write a purchase order per company performing that work per turnaround. This includes all companies, and so if I have a resident contractor there on site going into the turnaround, I will write a purchase order for that particular company so I can control that time of work. I've put walls up. If you don't put the walls up and control that, it's free reign on what gets done or what doesn't get done, and how it gets done. So we control that with purchase orders. Cost should be controlled in the same manner throughout the cost cycle. So we talked about the cost cycle on the last one, from scope development all the way to closeout. With that, these were the big ticket items. So I'm going to prepare a budget first, and I'm going to prepare it by a standard code of account, and I'm going to bid by the code of account. I'm going to award the bid by code of account. I'll also track, reconcile, pay, and close out by code of account. So this whole structure that I'm fixing to get into will clearly show you a standard high level code of account. And the last one was cost cannot be managed by work orders or job numbers. There's too many variables, but sometimes it's a must. And one of the big things that we see is that for warehouses, they do write a work order, sometimes a single work order for the warehouse or the supply house. So what they'll do is have a work order for a blanket material that has to be purchased, bulk item material. As we continue through the cost at a minimum, some of the clarifications, I've been saying code of account, cost buckets, cost collection as capital projects would be. I'm going to show you a little bit of an example. We've got 4 basic groups, and if I were to write a purchase order to a particular group, and I'm going to use TEPCO as the company that I'm going to write the purchase order to, I'm going to have them break the cost down into, first off, material. And I define material as any item that's going to be installed, whether it be newly fabricated material, something that we're going to be pulling out, whether it's bundles from an exchanger that's going to a shop and it's going to be put back, or any bulk order material that company's going to purchase, but it's something that's going to remain in the unit once the unit fires back up, it's in operation. The second thing is admin and overhead, and this thing covers quite a bit of things, but the main thing is this is defined as any person that's going to be in the unit that does not perform work. In other words, they're not on their tools, so to speak, or turning the wrench. This is admin and overhead, which is support, supervision, a non-working foreman. But some other things that may fall into this category, and sometimes people will break this out to a separate categories. Some of the disposal fees, thing that's that you can't measure or that's non-productive. The next is direct field labor, and this is defined as people that are actually on their tools performing work. And the last one is tools equipment, and tools and equipment can go all the way down to PPE. So if we have gear that we're wearing and we have to bring that in and we're charging or going to be charged as an owner for that, I want that cost broken out, and I don't want to see what that is. So those are 4 of the highest level bare minimum cost control categories that we try to break things down. So when we prepare the budget, we prepare it like this. When we get and receive a bid, we want to see the bid. So if I were using direct field labor, I want to see the number of people, the total hours, and a cost associated with that. So we break it apart to where we have a clear boundary between the group. But out of all this group, only one of these can be measured. And that one that can be measured is the direct field labor. I can't measure a superintendent or a foreman that's sitting there watching his crew. So this is the only thing that we move to the schedule. So the hours that's bid and awarded should be the exact hours that are in the schedule. And we're setting ourselves up for a couple of different things here. We're setting ourselves up first off for change management. So if something does change during the turnaround, it can clearly be reconciled and looked back on the original bid to see what was bid. But the thing that we're really looking at from a forecasting, from a cost perspective, is giving us the ability to do what we call a cost performance index. Are they earning the hours per day per shift based on the time that they're charging me per day per shift? So we're measuring the progress and seeing the earned versus the burn, and the earned versus the baseline schedule to see if we're going to finish on time. I want to give them an example of the admin and overhead, material, tools, equipment, and direct field labor. So if I picked a single contractor and said, okay, I want you to break your admin and overhead out, what they'll do is they'll come in and we'll tell them or give them a set of categories to break that out by. So if admin and overhead is the highest level, and underneath there I may have buckets or collection points, and I want to see every single charge that they're going to charge to me. I want to know what that is. So we have them break that out. And so for site walkthroughs, mobilization, and these may happen way prior to the actual execution, but we want to know all the costs. So the admin and overhead costs can be very, very high, especially if you have, let's say, some kind of an inspection company or a specialty welding company that's bringing in 5 welders. It may cost more to get them in there, get them set up, and monitor them than it does to actually perform the weld. And this is something that's it's overlooked quite a bit. Next would be the actual rental equipment. So if that company is going to rent any equipment and bring it on site, we would actually break this out. We want to know every piece of equipment, and we would daily count the equipment. We would want them to turn in a report every day to know what's on site and what's off site. Now, if this were a rental company, it would be just the opposite. They would be off site sending equipment to the site, but I would have a breakout of that equipment. The next is the actual material, so what they're going to be installing and leaving in the unit. So a lot of time the bulk material is taken care of by the owner or the client themselves, but if they are responsible for that, I want to see the breakout of that. And then also any of the long lead or fabricated or refurbished material that they think that they're going to have to build or refurb and send back, and we want that broke out as well. And the easiest one is direct field labor. How many people are you bringing in, and how long will they be here, and some rates, and we can put that together. But I use fictitious numbers here, and it equaled up to $1 million. But what I wanted to do was just to show you an example of what it might be, and this can fluctuate from contractor to contractor, but it gives you a little bit of a visual on how cost is more manageable by company if it's broke out in this particular fashion. This will be the last slide for my basic overview, and this one I wanted to, I guess, to distinguish between cost accounting and cost engineering. And it's not to, I guess, to put anybody in a position to where I'm casting stones, but there is a difference. I mean, and I want to I guess bring that out, because we see a lot of cost accountants put in a role, in a position where they're just not ready to do some of the things. So to define both of these, I'm going to go through some bullet items and kind of tell you the difference. Cost collection is what an accountant does, and it's solely based on numbers given or calculations. So in other words, when an invoice comes, they may take the invoice and they have a calculated field in an Excel spreadsheet or a program that does a given number for them. Where with the cost engineering, they do take numbers that are given to them. They do have calculations in Excel spreadsheets, but they take that extra step and say, how are we performing in the field, or what is the cost performance index? How are we going to meet the schedule? Are there impacts other than just numbers given? So they have a little bit more of the ability to forecast based on direct contact with the field. So that's the difference from a cost collection standpoint. So in saying that, a cost accountant may have very little or even no knowledge of the field, but very, very good with the numbers. So a cost engineer generally has knowledge of the field, but if they don't have knowledge of the field, they have direct contact with the field. So that's why we see a lot of cost teams set up and mobilized on site once execution, or even during the preparation through closeout. Another thing is from a cost accountant standpoint, it's very detailed and precise. They want to know all the way down to the cents where we are, to the dollar. What is this? From a cost engineering perspective, it may be rolled up, or things may be grouped, and once you open it up, you can look and see the detail, but they tend to summarize and roll things up to equipment classes or classifications or units, looking for round numbers. And the last thing is there's standard cost reports from accounting perspective. Not saying that it's very simple and very easy, but it's a standard process from an accountant that's done every month, where they're taking into account the accruals and things are gathered and produced. Where from a cost engineering perspective, we try to go that extra step and say, okay, based on where we are today and what we think is going on in the field, or what we've been told, or the productivity that we see, we're forecasting to come up at this number, or use this much of the contingency as we run a contingency drawdown, and we can kind of tell where we're going based on direct contact from the field. So that's the big difference between the two. And as an accountant is gathering numbers and reporting on numbers that they currently have, where engineering, from a cost engineering perspective, they're more in the field and based on knowledge given from either coordinators or from performance from direct field labor. So that'll be it for the basic overview of cost control for turnarounds. We'll be coming up with another video real soon, and I think that one's going to be over budget development. So we'll go through the actual detail of using the code account and look at the detail behind a code of account.